Love doesn't always begin with a fairy tale. Sometimes it starts with a contract. But what happens when hearts get involved? If this story touched you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd love to see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world.
Sarah was indeed taking her private emotions into the business. She couldn't forgive Charles this time. However, Charles couldn't do anything to her, even if he was furious. It seemed that Sarah was aware of this, which is why she was choosing to behave so audaciously. Therefore, the only thing Charles could do was to glare at her as he entered his office. Nonetheless, Charles couldn't let this go, so he came up with many ways to trouble her. The more coldly she treated him, the more he would trouble her. Thus, he called her even when he didn't have any orders. Sarah was so tired of him, but she had to follow his orders because he was her boss. After she had entered the office for the third time, Sarah felt as though she was going to snap. However, she still asked Charles in a professional tone, "Mr. President, can you give all your orders together?" This time, Charles indeed had nothing to order. The coffee was ready, and the files were sent. Sarah had finished all her work, thus leaving him no excuses to bring her into his office. Consequently, Charles couldn't help but discuss their private affairs in the workplace. "Sarah, what do you want to do? You have argued with me, ignored me. What else do you want? I'm not a patient man." Sarah sneered. She had never expected that he would be patient with her. What's more, it was he who was trying to cause trouble, not her. It was he who had given so many unreasonable orders. He was behaving like a 3-year-old child who wanted attention. Charles was indeed childish, but Sarah didn't want to spend time judging his qualities, so he said, "We are at work now. If you don't have any orders for me, I'll take the rest of the day off." Sarah was about to leave when Charles forcefully stopped her. Charles held her hands and suddenly pushed her against the wall. With one hand against the wall, Charles held Sarah's shoulder and didn't let her move. Sarah shouted out, "What do you want, Charles?" Raising her head, she saw his face. His lips were moving close to her nose. Feeling his breath against her face and seeing his dangerous eyes made her a little frightened. Sarah stared at him, nervously like a rabbit in the headlights. Charles said in a low voice, "Sarah, have I told you that you could leave? Remember, I'm your boss. You are my secretary." Sarah sneered. "Boss, secretary, then Mr. President, please fire me. I don't like working here anymore." What she said was true. As a matter of fact, she had tried to resign. It was Charles who had refused her resignation, promising her a better life. However, he continued to disappoint her. Angrily, Charles shouted, "Sarah, I'm your man." My man?" Sarah laughed and stared at him. "What have I done with you? Besides dating you, what else have I done? Are you my man?" Sarah didn't realize that what she said was such a provocation to a man, especially for a proud man like Charles. Suddenly, Charles squinted and began to fondle her face, her neck, her clavicle, and her lips. Sarah was shocked, grabbed him, and shouted, "Charles, what are you trying to do?" Charles chuckled. "Man? Is it so hard to become your man?" With his hands continuing to touch her lips, he added, "Sarah, you think I will indulge you again and again? Who do you think you are? There has never been a woman like you, who dares to shout at me, yet you disobey me again and again. I can't tolerate this." Sarah retorted, "You have never been patient with me." It was true. He always made her angry, never caring about her feelings. Maybe he could be patient, but not towards her. He was always patient with Emma, the woman whom he loved. "Yes, I think I shouldn't indulge you anymore. In fact, all I've really been interested in from the beginning is your body. You are so serious, so I want to see what a woman who keeps her integrity like you will be like in the bedroom. I tried to seduce you but failed. Therefore, I just want to conquer you and make love to you. Recently, however, I find myself to be a fool who is played again and again by you. I simply cannot stand it anymore." It had never occurred to Sarah that Charles would be so honest and hurtful. Staring at him blankly, she said, "You finally say this out loud. No wonder you chase me without any reason. I never thought that you loved me. You just want to satisfy your pride and lust for my body. You are so barefaced. How could you say that I play with you? Is it not true that you cheat on me?" Charles felt a little hurt when he heard Sarah's words. He didn't agree with her, but he couldn't refute her claims. However, he was still stubborn. He wouldn't admit to anything, so he roared, "You always said I didn't love you, but do you really love me? If you do, why aren't you willing to devote yourself to me? Why don't you trust me? Shouldn't a relationship be a selfless contribution and built on absolute trust? Sarah was distraught. He shouldn't blame her. If she didn't love him, she wouldn't have cared about him. She would never have been so sad and become suspicious when she thought there was another woman in his heart. Moreover, this man was interested only in how she gave her body to him. Who said that one should devote everything, including their body, when they love someone? Maybe other women were like this, but Sarah refused to be, and that was her choice. If she wasn't sure whether the man was worthy of her trust, she was not going to devote herself willingly. Why would she give her body to Charles when she knew that he was unreliable? She was not an idiot. Sarah felt herself going mad. She couldn't understand this man who saw everything in such a twisted light. She couldn't keep herself from slapping him and said angrily, "You are just a man who thinks only with his dick. I never really thought you liked flirting with women. I thought maybe you were different, confused even. I was waiting for you to change, but today your words have shown what you really want. I never thought that you were such a person, but I guess you're just another disappointment, aren't you, Charles?" Charles hadn't expected Sarah to slap him. He was even angrier now. He pinned her up against the wall and put one leg up against her groin. He said coldly, "If you're going to scold me in such a way, maybe I should do something to you, or your accusations would never be proved right." Suffocated by him, Sarah felt something hard between his legs. She struggled frantically. "What are you trying to do, Charles?" Suddenly, Charles kissed her and pressed himself against her tightly. Sarah could no longer speak. He started to tear her clothes apart, violently. It was clear that he needed to have her now, and wasn't prepared to wait any longer. Sarah struggled with all her might, but Charles was too strong, and she was unable to move an inch. Charles taunted her, "I can't stand you anymore. I should have known that I could just take you." They wrestled, but Sarah was too weak. Charles frantically tore off her dress along with a few buttons on her shirt. Her beautiful shoulders and collarbone were now visible in her underwear. She was struggling and crying, innocent in this attack. Charles had only wanted to scare her, but when he saw her like this, he felt his penis getting harder. The woman in front of him, who was usually such a prude, was so charming now. He could no longer restrain himself. He had to have. His actions were faster than his reason. Charles kissed her lips, her neck, her ear, and made his way further down her body. Sarah also found herself struggling to resist, and she also felt hot when feeling his body on hers. However, when she recalled his hurtful words, she was overwhelmed with sadness again. This man didn't love her, he just wanted to have her body. Considering this, she yelled, "Let me go! You are a beast!" Charles didn't stop, however. Instead, he parted her legs with his. Then, he grabbed her by her buttocks and lifted her up, putting her waist against his to let her feel his hot erection. He was still kissing her, sticking his tongue into her bra to lick her nipple. Sarah felt embarrassed by her reaction. She was almost half naked, sat on a man's waist, and had almost been seduced by him. Initially, it had all seemed exciting and hot. After all, he was her beloved man. No matter how angry she was, she still loved him, so her body wanted to respond to him. However, she continually told herself that she must push him away. She was being humiliated. At last she yelled, "Charles, please, let me go. Please?" Charles heard her screaming and suddenly kissed her. It seemed as though he wanted to intercept her words before they left her mouth. Then he hugged her tightly and murmured into her ear, "Sarah, Sarah." His voice was filled with lust. He didn't know that she would have such an effect on him. He really wanted her. Charles thought he could usually control his own lust and had never acted like this. However, now he felt heartbroken at the thought of not having her. "Let me go," Sarah cried. Charles stopped kissing her and hugged her tightly. He could feel his penis becoming hotter and harder. It pressed against her body, which made her feel dirty. Charles continued to hug her and said in a lower voice, "What the hell do you want me to do?" He put her hands on his penis, stared at her lustfully and said, "Do you know how much I want you? No woman can make me behave like this. Doesn't this prove that I love you?" Sarah looked at Charles with tears welling up in her eyes. "If you really love me, you should respect me and not force me. Let me go." Charles touched her face again. He saw her innocent expression shrouded in tears, and her upper body was naked, her breasts exposed. His penis became harder once again as he said, "You really want me to let you go?" Sarah answered angrily, "Charles, I hate you very much now. If you do something to me now, I will hate you even more." Charles looked stunned. He loosened her and retreated, staring at her. Sarah refrained from crying again, put on her clothes quickly, and ran out the door. She hurried back to her own desk, packed her things up, and left. From now on, she will never go back to this company, never be his secretary, and never contact him again. Even if she loved that man, he broke her heart again and again. She can't stand his ways anymore. She won't stay here and be played by him. Sarah felt herself going mad. She couldn't understand this man who saw everything in such a twisted light. She couldn't keep herself from slapping. After discreetly leaving the company building, Sarah returned home and immediately sent her resignation to Charles by email. No matter what he said to her, she would never go back to work. Furthermore, she would never be with him again. This time she was absolutely sure. Sarah felt so conflicted. Should she thank him for telling her he really felt, so that she could give up completely and get out of this toxic relationship? She had never expected her third relationship to end like this. She had never been so happy in love, only to have her heart broken before. She thought to herself that perhaps she should become a nun and never search for love again. Sarah laughed at herself and sneered. She felt so terrible, staring at the white wall, letting tears cascade down her face, making no effort to wipe them away. After a long time, she finally got back onto her feet. Then, she picked up her phone and called her sister. She asked if Sophia was busy, and that she wanted to go and see her. All Sarah wanted was to get far away from anything that reminded her of this situation she was in. She couldn't stay in this city any longer, where everything made her think of Charles and his wicked deception. However, Sophia said that she was busy with classes. If she wanted to see Sophia, she would have to wait for her holiday in October. Disappointed, Sarah hung up the phone. Although she couldn't go to see her sister, she still had somewhere else she could go. Then, she phoned several classmates from her university, whom she thought would be willing to have her stay with them. After calling several friends, she discovered several missed calls on her phone, which were all from Charles. She stared at her phone, stunned. Then her phone rang again, and it was Charles. Sarah was so angry that she rejected his call without a second thought. Exhausted, she lay down on the sofa and realized that she had no idea what to do. She switched on the TV but did not watch it, and listened to the sound. Soon after, there was a knock at the door, and Sarah heard a voice shouting from outside. It was Charles calling, "Sarah, Sarah, open the door! You need to listen to my explanation. Are you in? Please open the door quickly." Sarah was surprised that Charles had come to her house, but she chose to ignore his knocking as if she couldn't hear it. She was so tired of him, and he was constantly finding excuses after hurting her, and then continuing to hurt her. Since he did not love her, what could he possibly want from her? Sarah realized that this was, in fact, the first time that she had ignored him. After knocking for a while, Charles continued shouting, "Sarah, are you in? Are you in? Open the door if you are in." However, Sarah still didn't open the door. Outside, Charles listened closely for any noises inside the flat, but he couldn't hear Sarah moving around at all. Thus, he knocked at the door again. "The TV is on. Why don't you open the door? Sarah, please open the door or I will break it down." Sarah felt so angry at his rude intrusion. Therefore, she decided to call the security guards downstairs and get them to send Charles away. Suddenly, Charles was seized by the security guards. Even as he was being escorted off the premises, Sarah could still hear Charles's cries, "Sarah, you have to listen to my explanation. Sarah!" Finally, the world seemed quiet again. Sarah lay down on the sofa and stared at the TV as tears rolled down her face. Her dream of love had ended so suddenly. She felt so devastated because she had loved Charles with all her heart. Thinking of Charles and what could have been, she fell into a deep sleep. It was pitch black outside by the time she woke up. The TV was still on, but her room was very dark. With only the light of the TV, she went to turn on the light. However, when she stood up, she found that she was unusually weak. She thought that perhaps this was because she was hungry, or possibly because she was mentally and physically exhausted. As she fumbled to turn on the light, she noticed that there was someone under her balcony. Because her apartment was on the first floor, she could easily make out the man. Sarah stood in the corner of her room, decided not to turn on the light, and instead stared at that man under her balcony. Charles stood outside, with his car parked beside him. He leaned on the car and smoked silently. She didn't know how long he'd been there. Maybe he had just arrived, but he could have been standing for a long time. Perhaps he never left after being driven away by the security guards in the afternoon. Sarah felt utterly perplexed. She didn't know why Charles was choosing to behave like this. Seeing as though he didn't love her, he had no need to pretend to be hurt and explain himself. His explanation would only make both of them sad. It was a meaningless gesture. Sarah sat on the ground and stared blankly into the dark, unsure of whether to cry or laugh.